Welcome everyone to the last of our Elevating Women in Leadership taster sessions. I can't believe it. The weeks have flown by. So thank you for joining us as we explore this final topic of adding strategic value. So let's see who's joining today. So my name is Orla Power and I design and deliver our Elevating Women in Leadership programs. I'm going to be joined by Gail Lynham, who's one of our Elevating Women in Leadership facilitators. And we also have JC Townend, our CEO for UK and Ireland, as our guest speaker today. So we're going to be hearing from her shortly. So just before we hear from JC, let me quickly recap on these taster sessions in case this is the first time you're joining us. So originally, we intended to give a flavour of how we develop our programmes for those organisations thinking about introducing women in leadership programmes. But we know there's been lots of you attending, and I know from the chat and the emails I've got that there are lots of people who would like this development for yourselves. So we really want to share as much as we can and meet both needs. So for those of you thinking about your own development, I've created a worksheet for you to reflect on after today's session, which we'll send out, plus access to a recording of today. And then we also, on the first session, offered access to Develop Me, which has got a wide range of career tools. So those of you who requested that should have received links by now. And we've also offered a couple of coaching sessions for those who would really like some additional support. And we've been able to manage all of those requests from the first session. So I've got mine starting this week, they're booked in. And if you have asked, we'll be in touch with you, but there might be a little bit of a delay while we get these first ones done. And for those joining for your own development, we recommend that you find a buddy to talk through what comes up for you in these sessions. So we do this on our programs. So everyone has a buddy throughout the program to support them. And hold them to account for actions and what they're implementing. And if you asked us to organise a buddy for you from this group, hopefully you should have been matched by now and have been having some really good conversations about what's come up in these sessions. So I hope you're enjoying that networking. If you've got any queries at all about any of these, please do email us on ewil@lhh.com. And finally, as Graham mentioned, we're in webinar format. So because we've had a large take up for these sessions, it is different to our normal virtual learning platform. So it limits our interactivity and we can't do breakout groups or whiteboard, but we can use the poll and the chat. So get ready because I'll be asking you to get involved as we go through. And as Graham mentioned, please ask any questions and answers through the Q&A button. So Leslie's monitoring those for us and we'll have 5 or 10 minutes at the end to pick up on any that we miss. Brilliant. So let's start with our speaker today. Thanks for joining us, JC. I'm going to stop sharing so that everyone can see you. I know you're a really strong advocate for women and highly sought after as a mentor yourself. And I mentioned in our first taster session that women tend to be under-mentored and sponsored. So just wondered if you could share your thoughts on mentoring from your perspective.
Yes, thanks, Orla. Yes, I do think one of the things that we talk about in women in leadership is that in a lot of cases, men end up getting natural mentors in business through outside activities, through outside interests with other senior men. And what we find is it's much more difficult for women to kind of develop those natural mentoring relationships. So I think there's two things. I think it can be top down and it can be bottom up. So I think in order to solve the issue, I think more senior women and men need to be proactively looking for good talent in the organization that they want to reach out to and offer their services as a mentor. But that you don't have to wait for someone to single you out. It can go the opposite way, where you can actually say you would like a mentor and start to look at who are some senior executives in the business that might be good candidates for mentoring. So I know you asked me, like, what do I look for when I'm looking for someone to mentor, either accepting a mentoring relationship or proactively looking for someone. I'm looking for a top performer, so someone who stands out with having already done as much as they can in their own career on their own before they're looking for additional service. I look for someone who's willing to learn, someone who's humble, someone who can has demonstrated that they're willing to make mistakes, get honest feedback in the hope of improving. I currently have 3 different mentoring relationships with 3 different senior female executives, and I'm just delighted to do it. And I get insights out of them as well as me giving insights to them.
And what do they ask for particularly? What do they hope to get from you, JC?
Well, it's different. I mean, so one of my mentoring relationships is internal to the company. So they want my perspective of, as a senior executive, what do I see from them? What do I not see from them? And how do they progress specifically through our organization? And so sometimes it's about giving them advice about not how to improve in their current role, but how to prepare for the next roles that will be coming. My external mentoring relationships can be all over the map. So it can be a particular challenge that they're dealing with right now. A lot are looking for how they deal with specifically with their direct supervisor, how they handle the kind of the politics of business is probably the main thing that I get involved in, kind of coaching and how to navigate through those troubled waters.
And influencing stakeholders, I guess, is a big one as well.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah. And any tips on, so we often hear from women about, you know, being anxious or a bit nervous about reaching out to someone who's higher up in the organization. Have you got any tips for sort of how to do that elegantly?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways to do it. One is to talk to your direct supervisor and see if they can be a bridge to that mentoring relationship or suggest a good mentor. The other thing is there's nothing lost with a direct approach. So most senior executives have gotten there by being smart, compassionate, driven to help people succeed. And so they're not going to disdain an outreach. They'll be delighted to know that you're trying to find ways to improve on your career. And even if they don't have time right now, they might be able to suggest another mentor or another approach or things that they want you to do. But I do think that the key is, in all of my mentees, I've never had that issue. The key is to make sure that you're not expecting them to spoon feed you. You're willing to put in the hard work yourself to get as far as you can on your own, and you demonstrate that, then they'll be delighted to give you that extra support or push to get that extra things that you can't get on your own.
Perfect. And I've just noticed a question that Marion's asked, which is, do you see it as a sort of combined mentor-coach relationship, is what she's asking?
Oh, Orla, you'll know this better than I do, but what's the difference between a mentor and a coach? Yeah, absolutely. I think of a coach as someone who can actually help you develop specific skills, where a mentor is more of an advisor. And I guess I definitely blur the lines between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this last taster session is focusing on adding strategic value. So I think that's something that obviously mentors can help with in terms of helping mentees think about that. But just thinking about adding strategic value and how important that is as women progress into those senior roles. What does that mean to you, adding strategic value, and how do you ensure you don't get bogged down in the execution and can stay in that adding value in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So, strategy it's the most elusive topic in business, and it's the most important area to master. So a lot of people become very good at execution and implementation, and they focus their career moving up through the ranks, focused on being an excellent implementer. But if that's all you can do, you'll never get to the upper echelons. You have to demonstrate that you can bring strategic value to the organization. So when I was thinking about how to do that, I think it's something that, it's a good topic for women in leadership, because I think women are sometimes saddled with a stereotype that they don't know how to be strategic. But I think the little secret in business is a lot of senior executives do not know how to be strategic. And if you can learn and master those skills, you'll leap forward over others in improving your ability to add value to the business. So when I think about that, I think the first thing that I would recommend to people is that they really understand the basic strategic models. So if you want to be a strategic leader contributing to strategic value, if you don't have an MBA, or I have a master's in economics, so I learned a lot about kind of markets and finance and revenue and generation. But I didn't learn a lot of other business principles around strategy. So I had to teach myself those things through books and courses and things that I would learn. But don't skip that step. I think knowing some of the basic strategic authors and models is really important so that you can speak the language of the board of your company. So the very basic things is a SWOT analysis, PESTLE analysis, using some of the tools of strategy, but it goes well beyond that. I think when you think of strategy, there's probably 3 core areas that you look at in a business. The first is basic corporate strategy, and that's where you're going to find some of those business books centered in how you think about your competitive strategy. Books by the likes of Michael Porter, when you're kind of differentiating your product and that sort of thing. The second, which you can't overlook, is having that basic financial toolkit. So understanding how your company makes money and how they invest and what profitability they're expecting, et cetera. So if you're not good at finance, you need to be partnered. It can be a fairly junior analyst, but someone who's really good at finance and mathematics, who can test your strategies against the basics of business finance. And then the third piece is the human element. So a lot of executives fall down. They have a really good corporate strategic vision. They understand the finances and how it's going to work, but they completely ignore the human element, which is required to implement any strategy. So I think training yourself on those 3 things are essential. And then when I was thinking about how do you get started out? You may not be, obviously, if you're the CEO, that's your job, to create strategy, to drive strategy. A lot of CEOs have a head of strategy that's their entire job. But every person in the organization can contribute to strategy, and thinking about how can you contribute at your level to show that you're strategic. So strategy doesn't have to be a macro corporate thing. It can be one component about how you can improve profitability, how you can improve customer value, how you can improve employee retention rates. The people who are on the ground, who are closest to those issues, are actually the very best people to be inventing strategy of how to make it better. So I can give some examples of in my early career where fairly more junior people in the organization who were nevertheless really smart, really ambitious, were good at creating and implementing strategies. But I don't know how much time we have, Orla, so I'll pass it back to you for questions.
Yes, thank you. I'll just But yeah, just to follow up on what you were saying, I think that at any level, listening to those organizational messages that are coming out, I'm sure everyone listening has got intranets and is getting messages from their organization, which is going to give them those insights that you've just talked about as well. And anyone can have an idea, can't they, that they can share as well.
Exactly.
Perfect. So I'll just check. I don't think we've got any specific questions that have come in. No, so that's lovely. Thank you, JC, for joining us and sharing your insights. And I'll build on what you've been talking about during this session. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Orla.
Thanks, JC. So let me just share my screen again. Brilliant. So I hope you found that interesting, just getting us starting to think about how do we add strategic value. So let's just remind ourselves where we are in the program. So we're here. So we've covered quite a lot so far. So if this was a programme for first line or middle leaders, we'd usually finish after 3 modules. But if we're looking at these upper and senior leaders, we have this additional adding strategic value session. So before this workshop, you would have attended a discovery session, which I took you through on our second taster session. So it's an opportunity to share successes and actions taken from your first workshop. And I know it's only a week, but please feel free to share any successes or actions in the chat as a result of our session previously on leading with presence and impact. So anything you're doing to be more authentic, whether you've had a go at sharing your personal brand, or if you've worked on sharing your achievements confidently, or increased your impact by perhaps not over apologizing or brushing off positive feedback. So love to see any of those successes in the chat. And that's what we'd cover firstly in a discovery session. And then secondly, it would be that opportunity to bring any specific challenges or topics to the group for support. And I shared previously a facilitation guide for doing that. By the time we get to this third or final workshop, then we would be encouraging the group to be facilitating these themselves so that they can continue with these discovery style sessions once the formal programme has finished. So thanks for sharing. So some great tips from JC. Yes, and I'll pick up on some of those at the end as well. So today we start off for adding strategic value. We start off by focusing on some of the possible headwinds to adding strategic value. And then we look at your current focus and how you're adding value, including saying no. And then we look at increasing the visibility of our strategic thinking by how we communicate. So those are the areas that we're focusing on in this adding value session. And as JC was mentioning, research has shown that women are perceived as less strategic, not necessarily because the capability is lacking, but some things get in the way, such as what we pay attention to, where we focus our time, how we communicate, are we building those strategic networks? So just think for a moment, just at a simple level, whether is it always you that picks up the action points in meetings whilst others sit back? We think we're being helpful, but consciously or unconsciously, are we taking that role of doer and order taking? So that can perpetuate being trapped in the weeds, if you like, while leaving others to move on to more strategic activities. So it can lead to false perceptions that women are best at executing, keeping the ship running, rather than having this strategic capability to think long term, big ideas, influence stakeholders. And we all know that simply isn't the case. So another headwind is around how women face this issue. So how we're sort of raised and socialized. So we grow up believing that a good team player pitches in and helps. So we say yes and not no. And sometimes it can be hard not to swoop in and take on that admin work when no one else is speaking up or when things aren't done to our standards. So in this session, as we go through, think about, do you add your full strategic value? Or is that sort of daily whirlwind sucking you down into the weeds and stopping you from looking out onto the horizon? So you could use this session to really evaluate your true value add and where you're focusing your efforts. So as we start the workshop, the first part of the workshop is welcome back. And we start with getting the participants to think about, what does strategic mean to you in your organisation? So JC gave us some insights into what she thinks being strategic means, but we notice it does mean slightly different things to different people in different organisations. So love to see some of your answers in the chat. And let me just share some of the things that come out, and JC has sort of touched on these. So she mentioned about having that business acumen. So knowing your business inside and out and the wider context in which it operates. So the factors that affect its success, not just in your areas, but across the business. And so in order to be strategic, you need that solid understanding of industry context, trends, and business drivers. I thought it was also interesting that JC mentioned about finance. I remember when I took up a head of leadership role, one of the first things I looked at and asked, how does the money get onto my profit and loss account? Where does it filter in? Where does it come from? And straight away we were able to pick up some things where that wasn't filtering through. So really look at, the finance and what you're responsible for. Also think about future focus. So knowing where your business is heading, where it wants to grow and how you're contributing to that. So pay attention to those organizational messages and align your workload, your objectives, and also messages to your team. So you're translating those into what's meaningful for them. So focus on those new possibilities and long term. And then the last point around having a point of view on important topics in your area. So the rule of 3 is good. I'll come back to this, but think about 3 points on, how to lead through COVID. That's a top topic at the moment. 3 trends in your work area. This is about communicating strategically. So you've done the thinking. So have your points ready and be ready to share. And it should reflect those multiple viewpoints. So not just your own, but show that you've read and interpreted information and considered the wider business beyond your work. So I can see there's some lovely examples coming through in the chat around what business value means to you. So yeah, definitely that's strategic. JC's put that. Yeah, so great. So share those examples so we can all see those examples of being strategic. So what might be some of the headwinds to being strategic? So I'm going to run a poll to see which of these you relate to. So as I go through, think about whether these resonate with you. So a headwind can be execution, drowning in execution. So are you someone who likes to focus on getting things done? If you want the job done, give it to me, I'll do it right. And then we get more and more and more, and it becomes a vicious cycle and our job grows and grows. So it's a really good idea to have what I call a job laundry, have a bit of a clear out. What am I here for and how do I add the most value? So be really ruthless and focused around what you're here for. Multitasking. So we know that from studies that women are generally better at multitasking and we do it more often. And, we can be proud of that. We can use it to our advantage. But when we do that as an overstrength, then it actually can lead to less productivity, lower performance, and generally poorer well-being. So, we become distracted and overwhelmed, feel like we're spinning too many plates. So it can reinforce that tactical perception, and we can be sort of scattered in our communications. So control, are you someone who likes to take more control of tasks and you care about how and when things get done and to the level of quality? So sort of, keeping in that tight control on things rather than sort of fully delegating. And do you have that sort of high empathy? Do you feel guilty when everyone else is busy? Feel guilty asking other people to take things on? So, they're too busy, I guess I'll just do it myself. That's all about keeping that tight control. And then lastly, risk. So whether it's, going out on a limb with an untested idea or speaking up at a meeting or taking on roles we don't feel fully prepared for, are we too cautious? I mentioned before that research shows that when a job or opportunity is offered, women don't apply or put themselves forward unless they can do 100% of it. So could we take more risks? So otherwise we could be missing out. So we would have breakout groups to discuss strategies for overcoming this. So I just wondered, Leslie, have we got any results of the poll on this? Oh, brilliant. So you popped the poll up. So which of these might resonate with you? Okay, let's have a look. So as I say, while people are talking about this, we put people into breakout groups and discuss those strategies for overcoming those. So I've put this on your worksheet for you to think about which of these areas might be headwinds and what sort of things can you start to do to overcome them. And we'll look at those in a minute. Okay, so I'm just looking at the poll results. So yeah, I think especially after this year, the drowning in execution seems to be a strong contender. And then that multitasking overstrength, and then that keeping tight control. So, you know, sometimes feeling it's better to do it yourself or feel guilty asking other people when you know that they're really busy. Brilliant. So do you want to end that poll for me, Leslie? Perfect. Yeah. So there we are. The drowning in execution is coming out as the strongest one. Brilliant. So as I say, we would pop people into groups to do exactly what you've done. Think about what barriers challenge you and start to coach around what might be some of those strategies for overcoming the barriers, and we'll do those as we go through. And at about this point, it's about 60 or 70 minutes in this session, so time to move out. We give everyone a break, obviously plus an energizer. And then when we come back, we're looking at what steps can you take to be more strategic in your current role. So in the pre-work, we ask participants to consider what ways are you adding your full strategic value? What does that mean for you in your role? So it could be some of these, could be other things, so different, more. And really think about, as you move up in the organisation, are you getting the balance right? Or are you being pulled more towards that tactical side when really your level and job requires you to be more on the right-hand side? So let's just look at one of these. And again, I'm going to ask you to, if you want to, invite you to share where you think you are in the chat. So we're looking at sharing your insights. So if you spend more of your time on that tactical side, so if you're contributing ideas when asked and only when it becomes critical, and you feel like you're innovating under pressure, sort of in the moment and having to do it as it happens, then maybe you're more on that tactical side. And score yourself maybe 1 or 2. And then on the right-hand side, if you're sharing those insights proactively, so, you know, you're doing your research, you're looking, you're seeing what's out there, and you're doing that on an ongoing basis. So you're regularly sharing what you're hearing and what you're reading. And you regularly take time for that innovative thinking, either personally or with your team. That's more on that strategic side, so more 4 or 5. And if you're somewhere in the middle, round about 3. So really good to be thinking about where you see yourself. So I can start to see some results come in. And that might be through choice. It might also be through the job that you're doing or level in the organisation. So there's no judgment attached to that. It's just a chance to really step back and think about, have I got this balance right? Where would I like to be positioning? What could I do to be more and get some experience of working more on that strategic side? So yeah, I can see some people put, you know, 3, maybe 4, depending on the issue. So yeah, it's going to depend on the issue, depend on your role, depend on what's going on at that time. But a good opportunity to really stand back and think about it, because the challenge is we often get stuck in the inbox and we don't make time to really think about and add our strategic value. So we focus too much on the tactical and execution, so working in the business rather than on the business. So I mentioned that it's important to keep this big picture perspective and sort of try and free yourself from execution. We saw that that was something that resonated with a lot of people. So, you know, it's really difficult to think big picture when you're constantly task switching or if your day is packed with meetings. So if that's you, you're not alone. I think about 96% of leaders say that time is the biggest roadblock to doing that strategic thinking. So in the pre-work, we ask people to really assess and think about their current focus. Where are they spending their time? Is it on high value work? So those strategic activities that you need to keep doing. Is it on low value work? What sort of things are those? Could it be potentially done somewhere else? And then new value work. So not only things you're doing, but the things that are coming in that you have, don't have time for yet. So what can we do if we're not adding the right value? So think about some strategies that you can use. So I'm sure you've seen these, so some quick ones to think about. You know, have you got a standing meeting that isn't achieving anything, a report that isn't required? Can you put things off? Can you renegotiate project timelines or delay things so you can stay focused on something that you're working on? Or is there someone else that's better suited to what you're doing? Can you relook at how your job is loaded and more effectively? I think the most valuable of all of these strategies is thinking about the diminish. So as I mentioned earlier, our work can snowball over time and it becomes potentially bigger and more cumbersome than it needs to be. So have you got a meeting that's grown to 2 hours when half an hour would do, or a report that could be pared back? How do you get to the heart of what's required and reduce all of those less valuable activities that might have grown up around it? So it's a really good opportunity to just review your activities, have that job laundry and a clear out, you know, audit your schedule, look for meetings that you can eliminate or outsource, take back control of your calendar, blocking off time and creating those boundaries. So I think the message is, you know, really ruthlessly prioritize. Just think about what's the most important thing that I need to accomplish in this role. And I've put this on your worksheet for you to really reflect on and think about and perhaps talk to your buddy about. And, you know, here's the challenge. Even when we know what we should be focusing on, it can be difficult to maintain that focus with new activities coming in all the time. So it can be challenging to say no to things. But every time we say yes to something, we're effectively saying no to something else. We've only got a certain amount of time that we can spend. So we get the participants to have a discussion about when saying yes is strategic and when saying no is strategic. What makes saying yes strategic? So when we haven't got much time. So, you know, if it's important to our customers, if it's our strategy, if it's going to provide me with exposure, you know, that's a strategic rest. Yes, there's a real reason for doing that. And if it's no, a strategic no, it's going to be when it dilutes our focus, when we can't deliver on that promise, or it's outside of the scope of what you're really here to do. And we get participants to revisit a time when they did or didn't say no, and really think about the insights that they have. What do you think you need to think about this going forward? And as I say, we can see that saying no can be challenging. So how you say it is really important. So I've popped up some tips here. And an example that springs to mind, I was just thinking, what could I share with you, that from a recent program, one person shared how she's the only woman on a senior leadership team, and she always offers to take the notes. And she realized from this discussion that it was pigeonholing her in that doer role. But she felt trapped because it was now just expected that that's what she was doing. So obviously she made a change at the next meeting, and she started with that. Obviously she would prefer if the note taking could be rotated so that she could concentrate on contributing more. And she added that she'd be happy to chair the meetings as well. So a small change, but a powerful impact. So think about some of those things that you could do to make that small change that could have more impact. So in the real session, this would take us up to lunch. And so the activity just before lunch is for people to walk and talk with their buddy, get away from the screens and really talk a bit more about what's come up for them this morning around how they're spending their time, how they're adding value, and what they could start to say no to, and how to do that in that strategic way. And as I mentioned, we have speakers on all of the sessions. So our speakers started today, so that was JC, you know, so we really like to learn through hearing other stories and experiences. So we'd normally spend about 45 minutes and then have a break to stretch our legs. So we're going to talk about communicating strategically when we come back after lunch. So hopefully you have a lot of ideas and strategic thoughts going on in your head. So a challenge can be expressing them to others in a way where we come across as strategic. So This isn't about using big words, it's about linking to your business goals and what's important in your organisation. And there are some differences in communications to think about. So men and women have different natural speaking styles. So this is usually a heated debate when we get to this one. So talking about some of those differences and experiences that we've had. So men can be more assertive, they speak up and interrupt more often, potentially. Women are more expressive and speak up less often, especially when outnumbered by men or hierarchy. And we can find it hard to break into a conversation. So men use conversation often to assert dominance and they want to get those tangible outcomes, whereas women tend to want to use conversation to enhance social connections and create relationships. And sometimes we can overthink what is said, how it was said, and take things a bit more personally. So just generalization. So we, at this point, put participants in breakout groups to discuss what they've noticed. And as I say, usually a heated discussion. I've got Gail with me. So Gail, I was going to ask you, what do you notice as some of the common themes that come up in these discussions when we start talking about communication in meetings?
Oh, hi, Orla. I'd say, I mean, that's a key one, the we and the I, inviting people to really think about how often they say we instead of I. So that would be the first thing, to become aware of our own language around how we might be holding ourselves back. I think sometimes as well, there's something about finding the space to talk that can be a common theme. How do I find my opening to be heard? So the suggestions that have been explored with that are around maybe sometimes starting small. Make sure your voice is heard at every meeting. Doesn't really matter how it's heard, but make sure that you find space to agree with something, to disagree with something, to offer an opinion. Also, there's an opportunity perhaps to do some reflecting and some summarising. Oh, I think this is what I'm hearing. Is this correct? Where do we want to be going next? So make your voice heard as part of the process. We also like to suggest, and quite a few of our participants have done this and it's worked really well, is if you're in, maybe there's two women in the group itself, and maybe supporting each other. So it might be, oh, Orla, I hear that you've got something to say on this. Or, oh, actually, I think Orla said that earlier, because sometimes we can find that our voice gets heard, but then someone else might own the idea. So it's a way of ensuring that we make sure who gets spotlighted in terms of where the idea originally came from. So I would also add, if I've got time for just one more thing, is to think about losing additional words that sometimes we would use, like quite, sometimes, possibly, should. All of these sort of small words can often reduce the impact of what is heard. So we don't want to be apologising for ourselves. We want to be using impactful language. So is that helpful, Orla, in terms of sharing?
It is, definitely. And I was just reading in the chat, someone said that it doesn't surprise me that there's a heated debate at this point around speaking styles.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's someone shared that, you know, if you don't sometimes copy that sort of male behaviour, then, you know, that's, you can be seen negatively as well. So
yeah, there's something about not changing yourself, but just finding your voice and raising your voice in a constructive way. Yeah. And so definitely when we put people into their breakout groups to discuss this, then it's all about coming up with, you know, strategies, challenges, and people would bring those, what do I do, you know, if this happens in a meeting, or, you know, I'm you know, if I don't come in being really bubbly, then everyone thinks I'm in a bad mood. You know, how do I, you know, deal with that? So lots of things that we work on specifically with the groups. So think about maybe having those conversations with your buddy or other women as well, and find out what do they do and what strategies. And if there are other women at that meeting, talk to them about, have you noticed this? What could we do about this? So that's always good to get a bit of support, I think.
Okay, thanks, Gail. So to make our value more visible, as Gail mentioned there, we need to think about our language. So that's a really good place to start. So thinking about our delivery, energy and presence, and speaking with a point of view, which I'm going to mention in a minute. So if we're looking at how to make our language more powerful, think about some small changes that you could perhaps make. So Gail there mentioned about starting things with quite, maybe just switching how we're saying things. So I'm working with, at the moment, yes, I agree. So I noticed that in meetings, I'd either been, we'd have a discussion and I'd nod or say, oh yeah, I agree with everyone else. And I realized that wasn't really showing my thinking. So now I'm sharing, yes, I agree because. So I agree with what everyone said because of these things, so that I can show my thinking as well. And then another way to communicate strategically, which I mentioned right at the beginning, was to think about how do we communicate with a point of view rather than an opinion. So what do I mean by that? So let's just look at a quick example. Imagine that you are, let's say, at a talent review meeting. So you're reviewing the top talent in your teams and who to invest in for the coming year. And your colleague has just finished praising someone because they're highly technical. So they're a highly technical expert and they're praising them for that technical ability. And you're feeling that sort of emotional reaction because you don't think that person should be considered a high potential. So here are two responses. So one's going to be an opinion and one's going to be a point of view. And let's look at the difference. So the first response could be, I don't think that they're high potential. From what I've seen, they're not a team player. They're not timely in their responses and they contradict the team's decision. So that's my contribution. Does anyone else think this? So this is really coming from that opinion and sharing what you've seen. So when we share with a point of view, here's an example of a response with a point of view. So something like, so can I just share some additional information that might provide a different perspective? So if we think about our business and how it's involved, our customers have higher expectations than ever before. So those technical skills are a foundation. So we could consider those a minimum. What about if we consider some additional perspectives? So an individual's ability to influence, collaborate, lead cohesive teams. If we look at that individual, those are things that I haven't seen as a strength. So what do we think about how we're evaluating our selection of potentials? Okay, so you can start to see the difference. So when we're thinking about a definition of an opinion, so you're giving your view or judgment about something. So they often start with, in my view, I think, I feel passionate about. And there's nothing wrong with those. That's great. We should be sharing our opinions, but there could be opportunities for you to share with that additional point of view. Because when you do that, it shows that you've got that broader context. And it feels more objective and that you're sharing more insights. So not just what you've observed, experienced, what you've noticed, what you've read. And here's a simple model to do that, which hopefully was reflected in the example that I gave you. So think about if you were asked a question in a session, how are we doing on our diversity strategy? Here's a simple model to think about how you might reply. So first of all, reflect your knowledge of what's been asked. In this example, you're building on your credibility. So I've got experience on this topic. Then connect it to that bigger picture, that broader context or the strategic goals. So why it's important. And then your choices about how you share, how you're going to respond. And using that rule of 3 is really good. Try and think of 3 different ways. So in this case, it's what you've observed, what feedback you've had, and what research you've gathered. And then ask that question to further build that point of view. So I've put this on your worksheet again for you to think about. Are there opportunities for you to really make your strategic thinking more visible and perhaps focus on this over the next few days. Look for those opportunities to share a bit more than just an opinion, but show that you've got a really good understanding of the topic or the question that you've been asked. So Gail, any other insights on, just before I summarise, on point of view versus opinion? Anything that you've noticed from the conversations with the groups? Oh, maybe Gail's on mute. Gail, I'll come back to you. Let me cover the top tips on adding strategic value, and then I'll come back to you. So if I just focus what we've talked about in this session. So think about a focus on putting a positive slant on messages and why what's being asked is important. And use your strategic network to gather that information and perspectives. And identify your long-term vision and what you're working towards. Have that regular job laundry, focusing on how you're adding that strategic value. And really think about what impact you're having. Try and be prepared when you're put on the spot. Think ahead about what key messages you would like to share. And remember the 5-word activity that we did earlier in one of the other sessions. Are you seen as strategic? Is that part of your reputation? And if you feel you don't have opportunities in your current role, look at how you can get them. A mentor may help there. They might be able to give you access to those strategic projects or things that would help you build that awareness. And I've talked about this before. Women often, focus on that depth in our particular area, so capital I-shaped. So think about becoming capital T-shaped. So asking lots of questions, understanding the breadth of the business. And it can be good to think about a sideways, a lateral move before sort of moving up to the next level. And of course, finally, consider continuing your learning. So keep on learning, research and keep connected to your cohort or buddy. So we would have summarised with the group so all of the points from today and given everyone an opportunity to get away from the screens with their buddy and talk about what's come up for them during the session and what actions they're going to take away from the session itself. Then we meet back in the main room to review and share those insights. So that final close is really about discussing how they're going to maintain their buddy relationship and their pre-work for their final discovery session. So we ask everyone at this point, before they're coming to that final discovery session, to prepare their leadership vision statement. So we ask them to do that visually or creatively, something they can share on the screen when we're delivering that virtually. So a picture, a poem, a quote, collage, an object, something that encapsulates their vision for themselves. So the last discovery session, when everyone comes together for that, is really an opportunity to celebrate. So sharing successes since the last workshop. Looking forward, so sharing that leadership vision. And it can be really inspiring seeing everyone's leadership vision. There's usually tears, usually mine, but it's very inspiring hearing what women are then aspiring to and looking forward to. We also discussed sustainability, so it's really important. So how to maintain the connection once the formal programme has finished. So maintaining with your buddy, discovery sessions. Some groups decide to meet again 1 year on to see what progress they've made. And many of them want to keep in touch through either internal mechanisms, or some of them have set up a WhatsApp group. We've had some groups who set up their own book clubs. So based on, books for women that they want to read and share their insights from. So talking about how they're going to sustain their learning following the programme. And then really importantly, we also talk to them about sharing learning. So when we get to this final discovery session, it's an opportunity to maybe invite line managers back to hear what progress has been made, to sharing the stories of other women, And where we've done this, it's been really powerful. And obviously those line managers can get that understanding and knowledge about what are some of the headwinds and challenges and what they can do to support it even more and start to maybe change that bigger, wider culture. One of our groups invited other women who they thought would benefit. So they invited them to their final session. And I know we can't have a big group graduation now that we've got to the end of these sessions, but I really would like to invite everyone who's attended and got something from these sessions to share their learning with another woman. So I'd love to think that there could be a ripple effect from these sessions in all of your organisations. And so some key takeaways from today. I hope it's given you a flavour of how we deliver our programmes, as well as started you on your own thinking about your development. So there is a worksheet for today, which I've referenced as I've gone through. You'll also get our LHH research paper if you want access to that, and access to Develop Me or the one-to-one coaching. So if you haven't had that and are interested, then email us on ewil@lhh.com. And then finally, we're doing some research on 2 related topics. So if you're willing to be interviewed by me about your experiences, either of the menopause, so we're finding that more and more women are considering leaving their job because of it. So I'd love to talk to anyone with views or experiences of this. Or dual career partnerships, how both couples are enabling their careers to flourish whilst bringing up children. So thank you to those who've been in contact. I've started reaching out, so I've got some interviews set up and I'll speak to you soon. And just before we finish with some final questions and answers, I want to thank you all for joining me over these 4 weeks. I hope you've been able to reflect on and remove any headwinds that might have been getting in the way of you achieving your full potential. As I mentioned right back on the first session, one of the behaviours we identified of women who are successful in advancing their careers is that they believe there are no barriers to advancement, or if there were barriers, they worked out how to get round them. So I love this quote from Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's the world's youngest female head of government and only the 2nd elected head of government to give birth while in office, and the first to go on maternity leave in office. But I think she's been recognised worldwide for her leadership, leading with authenticity, kindness and compassion. So I wish you all well on your leadership journey, and I'm looking forward to speaking to some of you over the coming weeks, either for some coaching or for some research, or maybe on our open programme, which will be starting in September. So let me just check whether there are any final questions and answers in the session, so we can use the last few minutes on that. So yeah, great. I've got a few minutes for some final question. So we've got a question regarding mentoring. What would you suggest is an appropriate level in the organisation structure for you to look for a mentor? Yeah, so 2 or 3 levels above you. Well, so I think JC mentioned this as well. So traditionally it is about looking above you. A few levels up, because they're going to give you access to their network. They're going to give you a different perspective. They're going to give you some of that experience they've got about what's required to move up to the next level. So think about, if you're thinking about your long-term aspiration, if you eventually want to be CEO, then it would be really good to get a mentor at CEO. Or if you're thinking about the next level up, maybe get a mentor at the next level up to think about what do I need to develop to transition. I would also say, as JC mentioned, sometimes you can ask to be mentored from below as well. So if you want to have more insight, and someone's asked here about maybe a different part of the business, so you can look upwards and downwards. So I was mentored, as I mentioned earlier, by someone from the finance team who was very junior, but it was a fantastic relationship, and they really mentored and showed me how to improve my business finance skills, as well as sharing with me who are the people I needed to talk to when I was looking at my profits and loss account and not sure what was going on. So that was really valuable. So look upwards, but also look downwards. It's about thinking about what you want to get from that mentor relationship. Brilliant. So hopefully that's answered your question. So let's have a look at the next question. How are we supposed to tackle the people who say you're not a team player when we do say no to admin and execution tasks that aren't part of their jobs? Yeah, and how do we combat that biased response, gender-based or not? You know, yeah, it's a tricky one. I think the answer is to talk about it, to you know, start speaking up and saying how it makes you feel, what can be done about it, being really clear about managing what we think the expectations are of our role. Again, if we go back to that activity that we did right back at the beginning on the career planning taster session, think about what are the expectations in your role and making those really clear. And if those change, having those conversations. And maybe you could show how you're a team player in other ways. So taking on the admin and execution tasks isn't necessarily always being, but what else could you do to show that you are actually a team player, but in a different way? And then lastly, we had a question about, oh no, a couple more. What do you suggest? Oh, this comes up a lot. What do you suggest to do in a meeting when men interrupt you to close the idea or include a different idea? They interrupt a lot. Yes. Okay. I think Gail mentioned a couple of these, but I'm just trying to think, what sort of strategies do people talk about? So sometimes people feel more comfortable if they can share that that's happening and get someone else to notice it. So whoever's chairing the meeting if you can mention to them that it's happening and to be more observant. So I know, again, Nick, who's the speaker, was the speaker on our first session, he is super aware of this. So if I'm in a meeting with him and I get interrupted, he will sometimes stop and say, okay, can Orla just finish what she was talking about that idea? So whoever's chairing the meeting. If you're chairing the meeting, try and find some techniques that enable everyone to have a voice. So using that technique of, I'm going to ask everyone for an opinion and sort of go around in a circle so that everyone gets the chance to share and that they know that they will be heard and have that opportunity. So those are just a couple of ideas. I'm sure all of you have got a lot more. So talk to your buddy, talk to other people around you. What do they do when this happens? And can you recommend a good book on strategic thinking? JC sent me recently her top 5 books on strategic thinking. And I know one of them was definitely Michael Porter. So that was one. And I'll have a look and see what the other ones were. So if we can get that out to you, we will, and share a couple of ideas on that, because JC shared those before. Perfect. So those are all the answers, all the questions that we've got in the Q&A. Is there anything else, Leslie? Have I missed anything?
No, that's covered it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining this session, and good luck with all of your leadership journey, and I wish you every success. Thank you so much for joining us.